Hello and welcome to the Market Musings podcast, where today we welcome our resident pensions expert, Nathan de Cruz, and we're going to be talking about consolidating pensions. So I've no idea about that, so I'm looking forward to getting stuck in. Hello, Nathan, and welcome back.
Hello, Mark. Great to be back. Thank you for having me on again.
No problem.
How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, doing very well, thank you. Very well.
And hi, Kenny.
Yep, I'm unfortunately here, Mark, as usual. You've not got rid of me yet, so I think you're stuck with me for another few podcasts at least. But it's good to have you back on, Nathan.
Thanks, Mark. Good to be here again.
Yeah,
I hope the last one was useful to those listeners, and hopefully this one will be as well.
Yeah, well, it takes a wee while to build up a head of steam, but it was a good intro to the sort of pensions world, which every day it shouldn't be complicated, but as you know, there's so many different types of pension and options for different people depending on their age and if they're working for themselves or working for a company. Or, it is a bit of a minefield. So it's good to have somebody like yourself on to kind of break all the barriers down. And when you said to us that you were going to talk about consolidation, I'm hoping it's the same thing that I done probably about, 15, 20 years ago. I took all my pensions and consolidated them into one central pot in my SIP.
Absolutely.
So I'm hoping that's what you're going to be talking about.
That's right, yes. I mean, it's very common for people to have more than one pension now in the UK as employees move from job to responsibility in our now gig-like economy. I don't think we need to go back this far, but it's a good example is that 2,000 years ago, during the time of the Roman Empire, you would have these army generals who were rewarded for 20 years or 25 years of service, and they were given land and animals, possibly reduced taxes, and maybe a small administrative job to do after retirement. And that was to promote loyalty to the state and increase civility of an economy and the people living within it after retirement. And obviously, we probably wouldn't do much with land or animals now. Would you do anything with it, Kenny? What would you do with land and animals if you were given that as a pension?
You're given a donkey, Kenny, yeah. What would you do?
I'd probably eat it. I would eat the animals. I don't know what I'd do with the land.
Well, that's it. I mean, we wouldn't get that now.
Yeah.
But that's where pension started during the Roman Empire, during the times of Julius Caesar.
It's funny you should say that because as soon as you mentioned the Romans, I thought of the Monty Python sketch. What have the Romans ever gave us? Apart from the education, apart from the sanitation, apart from the roads. But a lot of things seem to stem from Roman times. They were an extremely clever bunch of people, well ahead of their time.
They were indeed. And when we had the defined benefit pensions, you were rewarded for your loyalty. You were rewarded for your service to a single company. And those defined benefit schemes, even today, are extremely valuable because they provide you stability for your entire life. And there are pros and there are cons to defined benefit schemes. And now we've moved over to defined contribution schemes, which are less rewarding for time spent within one single company. And so there's no there are incentives, but I'd say it's much less so for employees working today where, they're not rewarded for time spent within a company and loyalty is not valued as much as it was. And so now we have this gig economy, as I said. Can you consolidate your pensions? What was the reasons for doing that?
I want to control myself, which sounded like a good idea at the time, and it did work out pretty well until we had a bad run in the stock markets, but that was more than anything else. But I'm trying to think, I had 1, 2, I think maybe 3 pensions, and it was just for ease, and I was interested in investing at that time. I wanted to get involved, and it might have been longer than 20 years ago. Actually, now I think the internet was just in its kind of infancy, so it was yeah, it was still a lot. Nobody had really done it because it was still a lot of paperwork exercise. Nowadays you can just do these online forms and e-sign them, and it's half the job done. But in those days it was still a pain in the arse, for want of a better term. But I persevered. I did it, and then I had control. I could log on. I could see what was going on, and that's what I used for my first run at the markets, and I was pretty successful for 2 or 3 years, and then a bit young, maybe a bit aggressive. And, I've said this in the podcast before. I pretty much blew 99.99% of it just through a bit of stupidity and unfortunate run of getting shares suspended. And once shares are suspended and the company's gone, there's nothing you can do. But it felt the right thing to do at the time, because you were paying out 3 or 4 separate sort of management charges every year.
Yeah, that's right. I agree with you about taking control of your pension. I think that's definitely a positive thing to do. For example, you probably were getting multiple reports from different providers, which made it hard to track how your pensions were actually doing. And even though you might not have had the best investment strategy at that time, you probably took much more of an interest in how it was performing, either day to day or weekly or monthly, just more regularly than you would have done if you hadn't done that. Different administrators have different response times as well. So if you wanted to make a change to your pension or receive some information, you might be really motivated one week to actually have a look at them all, but then they'd give you information at different times. So one of them might give you some information after a week, and another one after 6 months, and another one it went into a black hole and they never replied to you. And then at that time, when you received all of those reports back, you might not have been that motivated to actually do anything with the pension. It might have been a spare of the moment thought that came into your head. But really, I think the biggest reason for consolidation is not administrative. I think it's more about seeing a summary of what your pensions look like consolidated together in terms of the asset allocation that you have within each one and what that looks like as a whole. And we have software that allows us to do that. It's not a cheap software, it's fairly expensive, it's subscription based, and you probably don't want to have a subscription to something you're only going to use every now and again. Whereas obviously, in my field of work, I'm looking at it pretty much on a daily basis. But we're able to consolidate them theoretically rather than actually, and say, the asset allocation in the pension portfolio might be heavy in one area, which might not be diversified well. So you could be highly exposed to Europe and not even know about it, even though the exposure to Europe in each portfolio was a smaller percentage of the total pot. And so you could change your asset allocation quite easily and see exactly what's going on. And that's part of that control feature that you could get with consolidating all your pensions into one pot. And it's really important the closer you get to retirement, because the closer you get, your attitude to risk usually changes. And Kenny, you said your attitude to risk was fairly more growth orientated, fairly more aggressive in terms of your stock allocation. And Mark, you said that yours, actually you didn't comment on yours, Mark. What kind of individual are you? Are you someone who likes to do a bungee jump and do a skydive, or are you more of a like to stay at home, have a couple of drinks with friends?
I'm not averse to a skydive. I've never done one. Yeah, I mean, generally, I suppose I'm the sort of person who does sort of stay at home and sort of thinks things through quite a lot, and probably over worries about things an awful lot more than perhaps one should. But my wife balances that very nicely, because she worries literally about nothing. Which is great. So I'm probably more of the. But when it comes to investing, though, I'm quite risky. So depends, I suppose.
Fantastic. So if you are, typically slightly more risky, and by the way, it changes a lot when you've had a few beers. So we have something called an attitude to risk questionnaire, which I wouldn't advise to do after you've had a few drinks. You need to be in your normal mindset, I'd say, to be able to complete one, to assess your attitude to risk, and that should fall in line with your risk strategy. And the importance of how you see risk in terms of pensions are I think I should say first that the two stages of pensions are accumulation and decumulation. So how much you're saving up until retirement, and then how you draw down on that after you retire. And during the accumulation stage, it's really important to maximize what we would call risk-adjusted returns. So if you are a little bit more cautious and you might be getting 2% from your existing allocation every year, just to give you an example of someone who might be 40 years old, planning to retire at 60, if they were getting 2%, but actually if they changed their asset allocation a little bit and optimize their portfolio, then they could remain within that low risk tolerance, but possibly get 4%. And that, if you look at someone who had or has £100,000 in their pension at the age of 40, at the age of 60, they would have a difference of just over £70,000 just from that extra 2% year on year. And that could really increase someone's quality of life. And the reason why we have these reviews and discussions around pensions is to try and maximize the risk-adjusted returns for an individual. So that's the importance of having a review and looking at it regularly. And going back to consolidation, you tend to take a bit more of an interest in your pension when it's all in one place and you can see exactly how it's working and the mechanics of it.
Yeah. What I found as well with the SIP was, it gave me direct access to the stock market. I could, what I was buying in my ISA or buying, just in my share account, I could do the same with my SIP. I also took part in placings.
That's fantastic.
Using my SIP as well, so it gave me a lot more flexibility. And at that particular time as well, I think people were actually using their SIP to pay themselves an income. So if you were managing your SIP, there was a loophole. I don't know if it's still open, but I knew one guy that was actually paying himself a monthly management fee out of his SIP. Now, I don't know how he done it. I imagine that loophole's been closed now. But there was lots of different things you could do with it, but the rules keep changing, the goalposts keep moving. So
yeah, exactly. I don't think you'll be able to do that anymore, to pay yourself a management fee. It could be possible theoretically, but then obviously you're taking a little bit out of a pension pot, and that could affect you going forward, and reducing that compounding effect over time. One thing I wanted to ask you, Kenny, actually, is obviously you said that you previously were a professional gambler, and that was really interesting for me, because for me, when I do the research on some of the things that you can gamble on, for example, like a roulette machine, you probably stay away from that because the expected return is negative when you're gambling, and so the odds are stacked against you. But I just wanted to ask, how did you do it? How did you achieve any growth?
So I would never play a casino with my own money. Well, I'd play with my own money, but not entirely my own money. So most of the offers were bonus offers. So I would put in like £100 and you would get £100 bonus. So right away, the odds are in your favour. Okay. Now, it just depends how you go at it. A lot of people would just probably go and play, say they put £50 in and they get £50 bonus, they would sit and play 50p a spin or something, and over time the odds would come back in the casino's favour, and eventually you would lose your money. Whereas I was a bit more aggressive. Now, if I put £50 into a casino and I got a £50 bonus, I would find a slot and I would play £9 a spin, which people think that's absolute mental. Now, it would be gone in 10 spins.
Yeah.
Potentially. Or you could hit something pretty big. At £9 a spin, you can win 10 grand. Now, I've won 10,000 a couple of times in spins before. So I would probably play 15 offers in the night. I would probably lose 13 of them, maybe 14. But in one of them, I'd be cashing out let's say, £1,500, and I'd only put in £700 or £800 in total in the whole night. So it was quite an aggressive strategy.
Yeah.
It wasn't just casinos. I mean, I was doing poker. I was doing sports betting, a lot of American sports betting software that I was using to try and get in the right side of bets. Again, with the sports bets, you were getting bonuses as well. So you could lay it in one bookie and back it in another bookie and making the bonus. There was all sorts of things you can do. I mean, there was huge online forums at the time.
Yeah.
And the more people you knew, it's a bit like investing. It's if there was an offer there you didn't know about, it suddenly would appear in the forum and you would go and do it. But ultimately, I done that for 3 or 4 years, and a couple of things. You start going down the food chain. So you start with the casinos that 9 out of 10 or 9.7 out of 10. Then you start going down the scale, and before you know it, you're playing the absolute dogs because you're running out. And I got my fingers burnt with a few dogs, and it was literally overnight. I just lost my bottle. It just went. I can't remember how much. 2 casinos went bust, and a bookie went bust or something. It was like £22,000 or something. It might have been dollars. I can't remember, but that was just gone.
Wow.
And there was nothing I could do about that. And just overnight, I just woke up and I said, I can't do this anymore to the same level of aggression. I still done it, but I sort of wound my neck in a bit and just I was just smarter.
Definitely. Through experience, you become quite a bit more knowledgeable and know what can happen if you are taking those really high levels of risk and the outcomes that could come with it. So you're obviously much more knowledgeable now that you've been through that, and even the psychological aspects of it, I'd say are similar to investing, where I see a lot of times where people I speak to have maybe bought some assets and they think, oh, this is fantastic. The market's gone up, and they make a little bit of profit, and they continue to hold. And the market comes down a little bit more, and then they think, oh, well, no, I'm a bit nervous about this, so they might buy out, but then the market goes back up again, and then they have to buy in at a much higher price, and kind of the psychology behind the kind of the fear and greed around investing, I think correlates to the gambling as well. So there are some similarities for it, but it's also really highlighting the importance of good asset allocation to get the expected return a little bit higher than maybe you would have been able to through other different forms of asset allocation. So it's interesting.
Yeah, it was. No, I wouldn't change it for the world, because I probably didn't sober up for 3 or 4 years either. But you get to see the kids every day, and you take them to school and nursery, and you wanted for nothing. I'm not saying wanted for nothing, but we had a good life. Still got a good life, but we had always had access to cash, and and people kind of looked at you and said, "What does he do?" And I try to keep it low key, but you know what it's like. You live in a small village. People start to talk. So, back to consolidation. I mean, there must be tons of people out there as well that they've got pensions they don't even know about. I mean, is there a service out there where you can go and it's a bit like your PPI, where you just give your details to somebody and they go and find if you're owed any PPI? I'm assuming there must be a service out there where you can say...
Yeah, definitely. There's a pension tracing service that you can use, and that's a service that I would provide if people wanted to get in touch with me in order to find their pensions and get some information about them, and that's something that I could easily help them with. You can also find some services online if you wanted to have a look at your pensions as well. You just need to know where to look and who to speak to. A lot of the schemes have been bought out, so through mergers and acquisitions, they've been bought out by different companies, and so your pension might have been with one company a few years ago, but then got bought out, and then you're trying to find it through that company that you're used to receiving documentation from, but it's no longer there. It's with someone else. So just part of the administration process to be able to keep on top of where they are, how much is in each one, and where they're invested is definitely important.
Mhm.
And that's something that people can do. Or if they want to get in touch with a pension specialist, they would definitely help them out with that.
So, so you've consolidated your pensions. You've got them in this one pot. Is it under the wrapper of a SIP, or is there other options now available?
There's a few different options. So, as you pointed out, if you have different schemes, you might be paying different sets of fees on each of those schemes, and you might have one really good scheme, and you might have one scheme that's not as favourable. You could consolidate your various pensions into that one scheme, which was a good scheme, and that might be a SIP, or it might be something slightly more closed in architecture, where you only get access to a defined set of funds, whether that be ETFs, investment trusts, funds, stocks and shares, like you could buy Amazon, Netflix, Apple, Google, Facebook, or bonds in companies like Lloyds Bank or Heathrow Airport Holdings, or any company that's issuing bonds in that way. I mean, there are a lot of people ask me about buying property through their pension, and they see it as something that they feel comfortable with because they can see it, feel it, touch it. I mean, is that something that you might have ever thought about, Mark?
Possibly.
I think the reason I ask that is because you said you had you weren't really content with the trust and transparency of pensions.
Yeah.
And individuals that I've spoken to who have similar thoughts, they like to invest in property because it's a tangible asset.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said about that, isn't there? Because it is real. And what's that saying? Safe as houses. It's been around for a long time, hasn't it? And yeah, the housing market goes up and down. But I would be more inclined, yes, I suppose, to invest in something tangible like a property that is mine and solely mine. Yeah, absolutely, I would. And I have a mortgage at the moment that, and I'm in the process of moving abroad, and I was deciding whether to rent it or sell it, effectively cash out, and I decided to rent it and hold on to it because it's probably a worthwhile thing to do in the long term. As you say, it's a tangible, real asset. So yeah, I'm far more comfortable with that as perhaps a longer term, stable investment that is future proofing as well for pension or retirement sort of age when it finally comes around.
Yeah. I mean, property, I agree with you, fantastic asset. We've seen an almost astronomical rise in housing prices over the last 50 years. Someone might have bought a property for £60,000 and it's now worth £500,000. Especially if you're buying in a catchment area, London or Manchester, Birmingham, place like that in the UK. And unfortunately, you're not able to buy direct residential property through a pension, through a self-invested personal pension. I think the main reason for that is due to liquidity. Because if you did have a pension that was invested in real estate, then when you get to retirement age, if you wanted to sell that, if the real estate market was not buoyant and illiquid, then you might not be able to release the capital from the house that you've purchased or flats that you've purchased immediately. And so you might not be able to take cash from a pension easily. And so they've kind of put a block on buying direct residential property through pensions. I think that's the main reason for it. But obviously, property is a fantastic asset to be able to gain an income and yield from investing in that type of asset, which is a little bit of a shame. But I think the reasons for not being able to buy property through your pension are valid, and a lot of individuals who have properties and maybe wanted to sell them maybe in this market are finding it quite difficult to release that capital, and then you could get yourself into trouble with taking out loans to facilitate your quality of life while you're trying to sell that asset. And so naturally the risk of property, especially the liquidity risk, is a lot higher than you would have from, let's say, stocks and shares, bonds, or funds, where you could sell that fund within just a number of days. You would sell it on the day, and then you'd be able to release the cash after 3 days, typically, if it was equity based.
Yeah.
But you can invest in something called a real estate investment trust through a pension, where you could get access to different geographical areas such as the US or in Europe, whereas you may not have thought about doing that previously. You might have thought about only buying in the UK, but there's some great areas out of the UK that you could get kind of indirect access to.
Yeah, and
but obviously, yeah.
Are you saying that there aren't many property pension because of the liquidity problem?
Yes,
yeah,
I think
okay.
that's a big discussion point.
Right, there, that makes sense.
Regulators of pensions.
Yeah, I guess what I was thinking was if you have a property, or maybe 2 or 3 properties if you're lucky enough, you could almost have your own pension coming in through rental income in the future. That's how right. That's how I was seeing it, rather than as like a pension fund, I suppose, a property fund.
Yes, that's right. And a lot of people do that. They'll buy property and they get a good yield from those properties. If they are lucky enough to have 2 or 3, 4 or 5, then they can generate a great income from that. Obviously, there are a few more costs involved, like your stamp duty. If you have periods where no one's living in the property, so tenant vacant periods, or if you have to renovate the property, those all are costs that you would need to fork out. But yes, I agree with you. You can definitely earn a good income from investing in property, and a lot of individuals do decide to do that instead of having a pension. I think Kenny hinted on a important aspect, which was that properties and taxation are linked. And if you have, putting it simply, actually, it would be good to know that you're either paying tax on the way in or you're paying tax on the way out of a tax wrapper. And a pension would be considered a tax wrapper, as well as an ISA, which would also be considered a tax wrapper. So with an ISA, you could contribute to the ISA with after-tax pounds. So you'd have paid tax through the PAYE, pay-as-you-earn system. You'd have already paid tax on that income, and so you could contribute to the ISA directly. And then you could also take your funds or your capital out of that ISA very, very easily without incurring a secondary tax charge. And then with a pension, you would contribute to that with before tax pounds. So you wouldn't have paid any tax through PAYE in the UK. And then when you come to draw down on it, you would be paying tax on those funds. So, it's just important to know that in one place you're going to be taxed, but you shouldn't be taxed more than once. I think that's an important aspect. And so if you do invest through a pension, there isn't the stamp duty to worry about. There isn't the tenant void period. There isn't that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And these property pensions you talked about, how do they work then? You said there was some like in the United States.
Yeah, that's right. So you could invest into a real estate investment trust. So the real estate investment trust could specialize in the USA. It could hold 30 or 40 properties within that particular fund. And so you could be exposed to the rental income and the capital gain from the properties that are held within that fund. And you wouldn't need to take a mortgage on that. You could just invest directly with a smaller amount of capital and get exposure to property indirectly, which some people are a bit more comfortable with. and do choose to invest in that way. And I would say that it's a good idea to have a little bit of exposure to property, as long as your risk attitude constitutes that to be in line with how your risk strategy is.
Okay.
What other kind of assets can you invest in that pension?
Okay, you said you invested in some AIM companies.
Yeah.
Really, through a pension now, through technological advances, you can get access to almost anything on a recognized investment exchange. So it's really open architecture. Whatever you would want to buy, you could buy an agricultural fund to give you indirect access to farming and that sector, or you could buy a technology fund, or you could buy direct equities in any company that's trading publicly. So it's very, very open. And one of the things that a lot of people that I speak to find difficult is making a choice of what to invest in. And the way I would explain that to them is by using examples of a mobile phone. So you could compare all of the different iPhones that have come out over time, and you can have a look at the features of each one, and then make a decision. If you're set on iPhones to buy, the newest version, maybe you might like the camera. It could have 4 different cameras on it, 48 megapixels, 13, 8.2, have 100 times zoom, maybe a larger sensor for more light to be absorbed, so you get better picture that comes out of it, and that might be important to you. But then you could compare the best iPhone to the best Samsung or the best Huawei phone, and actually you might get something better from a different provider. And so comparing assets becomes a huge element of investing in the right way. And so how would you do it, Kenny? I mean, if you're investing in AIM companies, how would you choose to?
Within my SIP?
Yeah, that's right.
It's probably a sprinkling what I've got in my share account. So generally I would be, if I'm buying a particular stock, I buy a portion of that in my SIP as well. So I've got the sort of same exposure in both. That's just my personal choice. And I always buy the cash element first and then buy the SIP second, because obviously my SIP's a bit more long term. So I always like to try and get in a bit cheaper if I can with my, especially if it's in a liquid stock. So no, I tend just to mirror what I'm basically doing with my real cash. Well, it's both real cash, but my accessible cash, we'll call it that. Yeah. I just mirror basically.
Okay.
If I can.
Yeah. No, I mean, if you're happy with the investment choices that you're making, then that's a good idea to mirror that in both accounts. Some people like to have a bucket strategy, so they'll have their stocks and shares ISA, where they're investing in maybe something slightly lower risk, and then they'll have a much more higher risk based asset allocation in their pension, because they know that they're not going to be able to touch it until they get to age 55, and then will de-risk later on in when they're in retirement, to have that protection and security from the pension funds going into retirement. So there are loads of different strategies, and one thing that I would definitely recommend is to have conversations about it, because you end up learning a lot. And a lot of the individuals that I speak to and help with their pensions, they actually value the education aspect of working with someone who's knowledgeable in their field. And I think that definitely allows them to have a more positive experience, and also learn as they go, up to retirement or beyond.
Yeah, it's definitely worth speaking to somebody. I mean, it is a minefield out there. There's so much in offer. So there is. But I spoke to you earlier on. You were saying that you've almost got your website up and running now, and a bit more activity in social media presence, etc.
That's right. Yeah, we're working on a few more social media campaigns now. The website, I think, is up and running. It's pensionu.co.uk. And there should be a lead form on there if you want to plug in your details and get in touch with myself. Then and have a conversation about pension, then that's something that you can definitely do. And I'd be more than happy to have those conversations with you and see if we can improve your pensions going forward. So, please visit pensionu.co.uk, and I look forward to speaking with you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, hopefully the next time you come on, the website will be 100% up and running, and we can maybe have a look at that. And I don't know, maybe if you've got a case study or something up there, we can talk through that, which is always pretty good when it comes to pensions. An example of what you've done with somebody. They maybe had 5 or 6 different pensions and been consolidated and XYZ and the performance over the last couple of years. So yeah, it's always good to have some facts and figures and a few pictures to show people what's what you can do with a pot of money. But no, it's been great having you on. I think that's 45 minutes. It's just flown by. So it has.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
Fantastic.
I'm actually going to go now. We finish this podcast. I'm going to go and get that Monty Python scene up. Whatever. What have the Romans ever done for us? I'm going to watch that.
I might just do the same, Kenny.
Put a smile on my face.
Yeah, a lovely afternoon.
Yeah, but I appreciate you coming on. Hopefully, we'll get you back on. Probably that's his end of July. Hopefully, end of August, we'll get you back on, and you can give us an update on your website and what you've been up to.
Fantastic. I would really look forward to that. Thanks again, Kenny. Thank you, Mark, for your time. I know it's extremely valuable to you, so really appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank you.
Right. Cheers.
Cheers now.
Thanks, Nathan. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to another podcast from Market Musings with Fairbairn and Russell.